I don't think so, no. bit.ly/Choshen Mishpat.
That's not on the website. So find the Wi-Fi newsletter.
Okay, I hope so. All right. All right. Good morning. Good morning. Okay, so I think we're ready to start a new tshuva today. The last thing that we saw. Oh, there we go. The last thing that we saw was the case of liability, where a person committed himself in writing when he did the lease agreement to be liable for all damage done to that apartment by fire, even if the person who is the landlord got an independent fire insurance policy. Okay, so that's what we were talking about last time. Another issue having to do with landlord-tenant relations is hitchayevuyot hamaskir v'hasocher legabe dira muskeret. The obligations of both the landlord and the tenant regarding a apartment rental. So the shaila is as follows: Sacharti dira bischar chodshi v'ha'asaka hifsika lif'ol. So I rented an apartment for a monthly rental, and the hasaka, which I think is the heater, stopped working. Al mi chovata tashlum. And so I think that's what the word hasaka means, because that would seem to be the right translation. But let me just double check. No, lahasik is to burn. The heating, yeah. So the heating stopped working. Al mi chovat hatashlum. So who is liable to pay for the broken heater? Alai o al hamaskir. Is it my obligation or is it the landlord's? Umahim hadvarim hamutalim al hamaskir, umahim hadvarim hamutalim al hasocher. In general, what are the landlord's obligations and what are the tenant's obligations as far as repair, as far as fixing things? So what did we learn from what have we learned from the past? Anyone want to pull out of their memory what tshuvas we've seen already having to do with major appliances? I know it's something that we talked about, fixtures and things like that. So anybody?
I can tell you how it's practically done.
How is it practically done?
You don't pay for that stuff. The
tenant does not pay.
Everything is in writing in the contract beforehand. Anything that is, heating or electrical or air conditioning that doesn't work.
Plumbing.
We put plumbing, like stuff like that. Anything major contractual, you pay for it. But otherwise, a tenant pays for everything else.
Tenant. What about minor appliances?
No.
Washing machine, dryer.
No, that's not a minor.
Fridge.
That's not a minor.
That's considered a major appliance.
Anything that's installed.
Stuff like that. Like they break a chair, that's their mobility. If they break a window, stuff like that. But taxes they pay. Insurance, I mentioned last time, there's two insurances. They have to have their own, and we have to have our own. Otherwise, I don't hear from them unless, like, the toilet is the whole plumbing that has backs up, or the electrical. It's completely in there. We pay for the major stuff.
And you're talking about an apartment that's rented out in Israel.
Correct.
Okay.
Well, that's what the shadow would be coming from.
Right. Okay. So the Rav Sharaga says, Pashut hadavar shahamaskir bayitz lachavero chayav latet lo dira shehu reuya lemegurim. What one thing is clear is that when a person rents out an apartment to his friend, he's obligated to make sure, the landlord has to make sure that it is fit for habitation. The kalul bazeh lahamid lo delatot. So one thing you got to make sure is there are doors to the apartment. Okay, that's one thing you need for habitation. Uletaken lo et achalonot. You have to make sure there are windows that are functional. Kedei sheyuchal lo gorbo, so that he can live there. So now this is based on this doors and windows is based on the Shulchan Aruch. As the Makor Baruch writes, Hamaskir bayis lachaver chayv lahamid lo delasos v'liftoch lo chalonos shenitchalkalu. That if you rent out a house to your friend, you have to make sure that there are doors on all of the doorways, and open up the windows that have broken, or I guess to fix the windows that are broken. Ulechazek et hatikra, to fix the roof. V'lismoch et hakora shenishbera, to support any broken support beams. Right? In other words, that's clear. Velasot nagar umanul, and to be able to create a lock and a mechanism by which he can open the door and close it and also secure it. Now, the ma'azeva is usually translated as the gutter or the eaves trough, and the tikra is the ceiling that is before the roof. So if those in any way break, so the ceiling is, I guess, a plaster ceiling underneath the roof. You would have to, if that breaks 4 tefachim or more, you have to fix that. V'chein kol kayotze bazem midvarim shehem ma'asei uman v'hem ikar gadol b'yeshivat habatim v'hachatzerot. And similarly, anything that is akin to that, which are considered to be major necessities of household living that require a professional to fix them, so that is something that is the landlord's responsibility. Well, that's what the Shulchan Aruch says, but that was long before indoor heating and indoor plumbing. Okay, so the question is, so what does that have to do with a heater? V'lachein im sochar dira im hasaka pashut shehamaskir chayav l'shalem et hatashlumim l'taken et hahasaka. So therefore, if a person rents an apartment that has heating, then obviously the landlord has to fix and pay whatever it costs to fix the heater. Kedei shahadira tiya ru'uy lemegurim kemo shesachar ota, so that it is fit for habitation just the way that he rented it. In other words, it all depends on what the condition of the apartment was at the time of the rental. If there was a certain expectation that there would be certain amenities to the apartment, then when those amenities break, it's the obligation of the landlord to fix those amenities. Kevin shahasaka zeh davar shemishtamshim bo anashim regilim v'lo rak ha'ashirim. And then the added point that Rav Sharaga adds is that the heater is something that average people use, not just wealthy people. And that's an additional point. Let's say, when I bought my house, there was built into the shower a sauna, right? Which is basically like a steam appliance that would create steam. Well, for some reason, it just stopped working one day. So does that mean that I have, if I was a tenant, would I have recourse to the landlord to fix the sauna? So based on what Rav Sharaga has just written, that's something that generally only wealthy people use. Average people don't have saunas in their shower. Okay, so therefore, I would not have a right to demand that the sauna be fixed. Shedavar she'ein derech rov b'nei adam lehishamish bo rak ha'ashirim lo chayav hamaskir la'asot lo. So therefore, the Aruch HaShulchan writes this explicitly. If there's an amenity in the house or the apartment that only rich people use, another example would be let's say there's an appliance that's a wine dehumidifier. So right, you know what I'm talking, or what? A wine cellar, but they have.
Like a fridge.
It's like a fridge, that is used to store bottles of wine, but it's not just a fridge. I think they do something.
The humidity's gotta be perfect for that type of thing.
Right, right. It regulates the humidity.
The temperature.
The temperature, right? So if it's one of those kinds of appliances that's only used by the Feinschmeckers, so then, so, you know that term Feinschmecker, right? No. Yeah, the Feinschmeckers, yeah. No, it means someone who's very fastidious and has very specific tastes, right? So then the landlord is not obligated to fix those appliances or those fixtures, even if even if the tenant is used to those amenities. V'ratzoy ma'od lahatnot merosh b'chozeh al mi yachulu hatashlamim hashonim, right? And as Moish pointed out at the outset, it is preferable for every single thing to be itemized in a contract before entering into a lease agreement. And
how do you determine what's wealthy and not wealthy? Is a bidet someone only a wealthy use, and if it's not working, then I have to how do you determine what's wealthy?
A bidet is a good question. Would we say that most people use bidets? I don't know. I guess if you're in the Muslim world, everyone has a bidet. So if I was a Muslim and I was renting in Mississauga from my Muslim landlord and the bidet broke, maybe I'd have a right to demand, look, this is something that is considered a basic amenity in the Muslim world, so you got to fix the bidet. But among regular white people, maybe a bidet is not considered to be a standard amenity. Okay. So the Makor Baruch has an interesting point over here. He says, he says, let's analyze this for a moment. Let's look at what the Ramah says over there. He says, Tiken hamaskir dvarim elu v'nishberu toch yemei haschirus. He says, if the Ramah says that adding on to what the Mechaber had said about making sure the doors and the locks and the windows and everything are in working order, he said, if the landlord fixed these items during the rental period and made it habitable, and then they break during the rental period, im amar lei bayis zeh ein tzarich lahamid lo acher. If the landlord said, I am renting you this house, then the landlord is not obligated to fix anything that breaks in the course of the rental period. But v'im amar lo bayis stam tzarich letakno kol yemei haschirus ad kan l'shana. But if the landlord said in the agreement, I will rent you a house, not this house, so then the landlord has an obligation to make all repairs so that wherever he's going to place him is habitable. In other words, according to the Ramah, he's more on the side of the landlord than on the tenant, the Ramah. You know, there's it's like a shifting back and forth of landlord-tenant rights. And some municipalities are much more on the side of the tenant.
I'd say all municipalities.
Most, I would say in today's world, most municipalities are on the side of the tenant. And it's the landlord who's the slumlord, the rich guy, stick it to the man kind of attitude. I know my son who's in Santa Monica tells me that it's like, that's the attitude of the whole city council over there. You know, they want to do, what is it called, where they freeze the prices, rent control, and all of those other things. You know, they want to give the tenant his rights because, you know, anyone who's a landowner obviously is a colonialist and an imperialist and all of these other things, right? So, but the Ramah is shifting more to the rights of the landlord. And,
the terminology there, I would not be exactly opposite. This house, meaning the one I figured out with the day and your wine cellar, this house I'm renting is what I'm responsible for, as opposed to some a house, which is very vague. Am I right? Some is like,
well, yeah. So here's the point. Your point is very well taken. when it comes to luxurious amenities, even if you say this house, you're not going to, the Aruch HaShulchan says you're not going to be obligated to repair those things which are luxury items, because unless it was itemized in the lease. Okay. But when it comes to basic amenities, the Ramah is even more lenient. And he says, even basic amenities, you're not going to have to fix if they break down during the rental period. If it was clear that it was only this house that was being rented to the tenant. But let's say a tenant says, I don't care where I live, I just want a house, a place to live in. If the place that we've agreed upon is going to be place X and it's no longer habitable, so then the landlord has an obligation to make good on a contract was to provide him any house. So right now this is not a house because it can't live in it. So he's got to provide me with another house that has the basic amenities. Now that doesn't seem to be the way we paskin, but let's see how we reconcile the Ramah with the current practice. So that's really the Makor Baruch's question. He says, in our situation where a tenant rents a specific apartment and not just an apartment, then why don't we say the same thing? Why don't we say that the landlord is exempt from fixing it? I gave you a perfectly good apartment with a perfectly good working heater when you came in. I fulfilled my end of the bargain. If it breaks down, well, it was this apartment, not another apartment, so therefore you should have to fix it. So he says, here's the difference. He says, Yitachen diyesh lechalek. We have to make a distinction. The Masha Kosov Arama Hainu Davkim Hemid Lo Hakol Kemo Shetzarich V'Haya Ra'ui Lahachzik Ma'amad Kol Zman HaSchirut. That he says the Ramah is talking about a case where the landlord provided the tenant everything. Here's everything you need for a fully functional living space, and that it's meant to last for the entire rental period. And therefore, if it stops, something breaks down in the middle of that rental period, then the landlord could say, sorry, buddy, it's your tough luck that the roof started leaking again. But he says, in our case, the heater stopped working because it just, over the course of the regular wear and tear, it just stopped working. Okay, so it's a very subtle distinction. When I provided you with an apartment in the Ramah's case, I gave you a very sturdy structure that was meant to last for the entire duration of the rental period. Let's say it was a 1-year rental period. And I had the roof thatched and fixed, and everything was correctly done to specs. And whatever I did to the apartment was meant to last for at least a year. If in that situation, a freak accident happens, and the house gets hit by lightning, and therefore there's a hole in the roof now, then that's your bad mazel, the Ramah would argue, and therefore you have to fix it. If, however, over the course of normal wear and tear, something breaks down such that if the lease period is for a year, through normal wear and tear, it was expected that eventually the heater would break down, either before a year is up or after a year is up. So then that becomes the responsibility of the landlord, because it was expected that something like this could happen. But if taka, it was a brand new heater, and for some reason it stopped working, me'ikar hadin hamaskir patur v'tzarachim. But that by that argument, If it's a brand new, let's say, water heater, and all of a sudden it stops working, we can't figure out why. So then it could be that would be that the landlord could say, I provided you with the heater that's supposed to work the entire period of the lease, and therefore I'm exempt. But he says that's not so clear. But the standard practice today is to obligate the landlord, even in those situations where through some freak accident, the appliance or the roof breaks down. And as the Ramah himself writes, in that siman of Shulchan Aruch, that you always follow the minhag HaMedina, the standard practice of wherever you live. And today that just wouldn't fly. That landlord says, well, I just purchased a new water heater. I don't understand why it stopped working. If it stopped working, then it must be your bad mazel. And so you have to go take care of it. That just would not fly.
So what about, talking about warranties? You buy a brand new water heater in the first year, there's some warranties involved with that.
Right. Well,
That's a separate issue.
yeah, that would have
That's
to, the landlord would have to go and go back to the company that provided him with the water heater and have them make good on the warranty.
It's not the tenant's responsibility.
Bottom line is that it's not, when any major appliance breaks down, it's not the tenant's responsibility. But with all of that said, now let's look at the next part.
Right, so something like a kettle stops working, so that is what you're talking about, it's a differential between something major and something not major.
Well, for all we've seen so far is that it has to be something that is a necessity for living, not a luxury item. And it has to be something that was provided at the beginning of the lease.
Mhm.
As far as major or minor appliance, I'm not sure.
I can tell you when you rent an Airbnb, if the kettle's not working, they replace it. If I rent for 2 weeks, it comes with all the amenities that you can use.
Yeah, but I'm not sure. So that's a special case in Airbnb because there's an expectation that not only just the basic living things, but also like minor appliances and eating utensils are going to be provided also because it's a short-term lease. All right, it could be that it also depends on, you also have to remember that the Airbnb situation is where like they want to get the high rating. Don't you put in a rating like Uber afterwards? I've never done an Airbnb. And I don't think I have.
Rabbi, in Ontario, the Residential Tenancy Act requires landlords to provide vital services like hot and cold water, fuel, electricity, gas, and during certain months of the year, heat. And if they don't, they're deemed to be unlawful. So they make that distinction vital.
Vital, right. So the wine cellar is not a vital.
Well, you're an alcoholic.
Yeah. Right. All right, let's just finish this. Thank you, Mark. Avol sha'ar tashlumin kigon mayim chashmal v'tashlumei va'ad bayit. He says, but let's look at other expenses: water bill, electric bill, payment for the homeowners association or the condo association, which is called the Vad Bayit in Israel. Anovim mishimush habayit kagon nikayon, and other things that are a result of regular use of the apartment, like cleaning the apartment, the expense for cleaning. To ora b'cheder hamadregot, the lighting expenses that are incurred by all of the tenants jointly for lighting the stairwells. V'chein hotzaot ginun, the expenses for maintenance of the yard, of the garden outside the apartment building. Kol eila mutalim al hasocher. Those are the responsibility of the tenant, which is a big chiddush. In other words, when I rent out my apartment, the Vad Bayit is the homeowners association fees are upon the tenant, which is surprising because I don't think that's the way it works. They pay the vad bayit.
Everything.
But one second, if I rent
You pay condo fees in Ontario.
if I rent a condo in the conservatory, do I have to pay the condo
That's what
fees?
your arrangement is with the person that you're doing. It's gotta be for everything.
What?
Either the.
Usually here, I think it's the owner who pays the condo association fees. But he's
The
saying in Israel, it's different.
They pay everything, Arnona, property taxes, all.
Usually. Much less.
Okay. אבל תשלומי ועד הבית הנוגעים לשיפוץ או סיוד חדר מדרגות שהם דברים יסודיים או החלפת צנרת וכדומה מוטלים על המשכיר. But if there are assessments that are made by the condo association or the apartment association for repairs to major features of the building, let's say they need to repave the stairwell, or they need to repave the pool, right, or they need to change the piping in the what is Saneret? Let me just see. Yeah, they need to change the plumbing. Yeah, plumbing. Sinor is a pipe. So then that's the landlord's obligation. So regular monthly maintenance fees, that's on the tenant, but major repair fees that the tenants, that the apartment owners all have to pay, that is incumbent upon the landlord. Now, let's say some breakage occurs because of the use of the tenant. So then that's the tenant's responsibility. So, if, for example, I as a tenant end up doing something that causes something to break in the apartment, right? That was where we had the question of the dud shemesh, right? Where the claim was that you didn't do what everyone knows you're supposed to do, which is to let out the water before the pipes to prevent the pipes from freezing over. So then the liability is upon the tenant. Because that's no different from the cost of cleaning the apartment. That's the tenant's responsibility. Arnona, which is property tax, that's on the landlord. Sorry, that's on the tenant. Sorry, because that is for the purpose, that is to serve the tenant. Because I guess what, that's to take care of. No, Arnona, I think is also, isn't that property tax, but that's for, like, let's say a sanitation department that pays for sanitation, it pays for street maintenance, it pays for, for
gardening of the street, all that stuff.
Yeah.
Garbage.
So that's to the benefit of the tenant who's living there. So then that's why the tenant has to pay for it. Also, mezuzahs, that's the obligation of the tenant. And if there's a need for a ma'akeh, let's say to build a parapet on the rooftop, that's also upon the tenant, because that's for his protection. All right, we'll have to, I want to.
So mezuzahs, that's interesting. Think about that.
Yeah.
You have to leave them there for yids coming in, right? You can't.
Yeah, but that's only from this. Leaving mezuzahs is an obligation to leave it, because you don't want to you're not allowed to let someone come into an apartment that doesn't have mezuzahs, but you have a right to charge him. The financial obligation is on the new tenant. If you're leaving mezuzahs for him, either he has to pay you for them, or he can take them down and put on his own and then give them back to you. Okay, we'll have to hold it here for today. Let's continue this in Yom Hashem.